Amelie was known in her Durban neighborhood as a kind woman with a warm smile. She worked hard every day, always putting others first. Her husband, Sifo, was the opposite in many ways. He had charm that drew people in, but behind closed doors, his arrogance often left Amelie carrying the weight of their life together. Still, she stayed, believing in love and hoping her patience would one day soften his pride. That evening, after a quiet dinner, something in Sifo's mood shifted. His eyes grew sharp, his voice colder than the night breeze slipping through the window. Out of nowhere, he looked at Amelie and said the words that cut deeper than any blade. "You're useless." She sat frozen, her heart pounding, unsure how to answer the man she had sacrificed so much for. The hours dragged, heavy with silence, until midnight came. Then, without warning, Sifo grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Amelie tried to ask what she had done, but he didn't listen. He shoved her outside, slammed the door, and locked it tight. Barefoot on the cold ground, Amelie begged him to let her back in. Her voice trembled, carrying both fear and love, but from the window above came only laughter. Sifo leaned out, mocking her cries, his cruel smile lit by the weak moonlight. Behind the curtains, neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads, others stared in silence, but no one moved to help. Amelie stood alone, shivering in the dark, betrayed in the very place she once called home. Amelie sat on the hard pavement just outside the gate, her knees pulled close to her chest. The night was heavy and cold, the street lights buzzing faintly above her. She wept until her cheeks burned, her tears mixing with the dust on her face. Each sob echoed in her chest like a wound that refused to close. She couldn't understand how the man she had given everything to could throw her out like trash. The streets were quiet except for the occasional bark of a stray dog or the hum of a passing car. Every now and then, she caught the shadow of a neighbor peeking through a curtain. She could almost feel their whispers drifting in the dark. Poor Amelie. Some shook their heads, others just watched, but no one opened their door. She was alone, shivering barefoot, her heart breaking in the cold night. As she sat there, memories began flooding her mind. She thought of the years she had spent standing by Sifo when no one else believed in him. When his first business collapsed, it was her who used her small salary to pay off the debts. When the second one failed, she had taken off her wedding necklace, a gift from her late father, and sold it just to keep food on the table. She had given pieces of herself away, little by little, because she believed that one day he would succeed, and they would succeed together. Her chest tightened when she remembered how he used to promise her the world. "Trust me, Amelie. One day, you'll thank me for making you my wife." She had trusted him. She had built her life around those words, only to find herself sitting alone under a flickering streetlight, discarded like nothing. The night stretched on, and her tears began to slow. Her body was exhausted, but her mind grew sharper. With every memory of what she had lost, another thought pushed through. I am more than this. She thought of the young woman she used to be, strong, determined, carrying her family's pride in her heart. That woman had not disappeared. She had only been buried under years of Sifo's arrogance. By the time the sky began to soften with the first hint of dawn, something inside Amelie shifted. She was still tired, still aching, but no longer broken. The same woman who had once sacrificed everything now felt a fire she hadn't known in years. The streetlight flicked off as the sun stretched over Durban, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand. Amelie rose slowly to her feet, her eyes fixed on the horizon. In a low, steady voice, she whispered to herself, "If he thinks he can throw me away, he has forgotten who I truly am." The night had stolen her tears, but the morning gave her resolve. And this time, she promised herself, she would not bend for Sifo again. As Amelie stood in the quiet morning, her mind drifted back to memories she had kept locked away for years. Long before Sifo's cruel laughter from the window, before his arrogance swallowed their home, her father had left her something precious. When he passed away, she inherited a property in Cape Town, a modest but valuable gift that carried not just financial worth, but his love and trust in her. At the time, she kept it hidden, not out of shame, but because she wanted to build her marriage with Sifo on love, not wealth. She thought she would never need to lean on that inheritance. Then came the years of Sifo's dreams, businesses that burned through money faster than they earned it. Each time, he came to her with desperate eyes, asking her to stand by him. And each time, she gave in, convincing herself that this time would be different. One night, he begged her to put one of his ventures under her name, claiming that it would help secure loans and contracts. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. She thought it was just paperwork, another sacrifice for the man she loved. What Sifo never realized was that in signing those papers, she became the legal owner of more than just his failed venture. The very house they lived in, the place where he now strutted like a king, had been secured in her name. He celebrated, believing he had tricked her into carrying his burden. But in truth, the law saw Amelie as the rightful owner. She never corrected him. She never waved the papers in his face. She simply filed the documents away with her lawyer, Mr. Dlamini, and let him keep them safe. Emily had always hoped she would never need those papers. She wanted her marriage to be built on trust, not legal battles. She wanted her love to mean more than signatures and seals. But as she remembered the sound of Sipho's cruel laugh echoing in the night, the weight of betrayal pressed deeper into her heart. He thought she was powerless. He thought he had the final word. He thought he had locked her out of everything. What Sipho didn't know was that the walls around him, the roof over his head, even the ground beneath his feet, did not belong to him. Every brick, every corner of that house was tied to her name. And she had kept this truth hidden, not because she was weak, but because she believed in giving him a chance to be a better man. Now, as the sun rose higher, Emily realized those hidden documents were no longer just folded pages in a lawyer's office. They were her shield, her weapon, her proof that she was never as helpless as Sipho believed. For years she had stayed quiet, but soon the silence would break. The secret he had forgotten was about to become the storm he could not escape. The morning after her long night on the pavement, Emily made her way to the office of Mr. Dlamini, the lawyer her father had trusted for years. Her steps were slow but steady, her heart heavy yet determined. The glass door reflected her tired face, but in her eyes there was something new, a spark of resolve that had survived Sipho's cruelty. Mr. Dlamini looked up from his desk when she walked in. He was a man of quiet authority, with sharp eyes that always seemed to see more than people wanted to reveal. But when he saw Emily, his expression softened. He rose to greet her with respect, not pity, and motioned for her to sit. Emily took a deep breath before she spoke. The words tumbled out, sometimes broken by emotion, as she told him what had happened, how Sipho had dragged her out at midnight, how he had mocked her from the window while neighbors whispered, how she sat in the cold until morning with nothing but her tears. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. This was her truth, and she wanted it heard. Mr. Dlamini listened without interrupting. His face stayed calm, though his eyes burned with quiet anger at the injustice. When she finished, he leaned forward and said in a steady voice, "Emily, the man who threw you out locked you out of a house that was never his. The law is clear. You are the rightful owner. Now we will return, not with tears but with power." For the first time in days, Emily felt her shoulders lighten. She had carried so much alone, but here was someone standing beside her, not as a savior but as an ally. Mr. Dlamini reached into his files and pulled out the documents she had signed years ago, the same ones she had trusted him to keep safe. The papers that Sipho had forgotten, but which carried the weight of truth. They spread the documents across the desk. Mr. Dlamini explained each one carefully, making sure Emily understood. The deed to the house, the registration of the business, the signatures that tied everything back to her name. The very things Sipho had used to inflate his pride were the same things that now revealed his weakness. As they worked, Emily's sadness slowly shifted into strength. With every stamp, every signature, every legal detail reviewed, she felt the pieces of her power being put back together. This was no longer just about surviving her husband's cruelty. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her voice, and her rightful place. By the time Emily left Mr. Dlamini's office, the sun was high and the streets of Durban bustled with life. She clutched the legal papers close to her chest, not with fear, but with certainty. Sipho thought she had been thrown away, but soon he would learn the truth. She was not returning as a broken woman. She was returning as the owner of everything he thought was his. While Emily was quietly preparing her next steps, Sipho was busy filling the house with noise and laughter. 2 nights after he threw her out, he invited a few close friends and his mistress, Nality, to celebrate. The living room, still carrying traces of Emily's careful touch, was now cluttered with bottles, loud music, and careless laughter. Sipho leaned back in his chair, a drink in his hand, his smile wide and arrogant. "Finally," he said, raising his glass high, "I got rid of dead weight. That woman was holding me back. This house, this life, it's all mine now. My kingdom." His words dripped with pride, and his guests cheered, clapping and whistling as if he had accomplished something great. Nality, dressed in a shiny red dress, curled against him and laughed loudly. "At least now you can live like a real man, without someone nagging you about money and failures," she teased, her voice sharp with mockery. The others joined in, making cruel jokes about Emily, calling her weak, boring, and invisible. No one in that room knew the truth. No one realized that the very house they sat in, the walls echoing with their laughter, was never Sipho's to begin with. Sipho soaked in the attention like a man starved for. Each laugh at Emily's expense fed his ego. He strutted around the living room, pointing to the furniture, the art, the television, declaring, "All of this belongs to me. No one can take it away." His guests nodded, raising their glasses again, blind to the storm waiting just beyond the horizon. In his mind, Emily was gone for good. He imagined her wandering the streets, powerless and humiliated. The thought made him laugh harder, a cruel satisfaction spreading through him. He didn't see her strength, didn't remember the sacrifices she had made, and certainly didn't suspect that the very papers that could strip him of everything were already in motion. As the night wore on, the music grew louder, the drinks flowed faster, and Sipho's chest swelled with pride. He was untouchable, or so he believed. Surrounded by friends who cheered his arrogance and a mistress who fed his vanity, Sipho felt like a king on his throne. But a king without a crown, without real power, is only pretending. Outside the walls of his so-called kingdom, Amelie was no longer sitting in tears. She was rising, stronger and sharper than he had ever known her to be. And while Sipho toasted to his victory, he had no idea that his downfall had already begun. The house he bragged about, the life he flaunted, the pride he wore so proudly, all of it belonged to the woman he thought he had destroyed. The celebration was loud, but it would not last. The silence that followed would be louder, and Sipho would soon learn that his laughter had been built on a lie. 2 nights after Sipho's wild celebration, the street outside the house grew quiet again. The music was gone, the laughter had faded, and only the faint hum of the city remained. It was on this night that Amelie returned. She was not the same woman who had once stood barefoot in the cold, begging for mercy. This time she walked with steady steps, her head high. Beside her was Mr. Dlamini, his briefcase tucked firmly under his arm, carrying the documents that would change everything. They stopped at the gate. Amelie's eyes lingered on the house for a moment. She remembered every sacrifice she had made within those walls, every insult Sipho had thrown, and the final betrayal when he locked her out. But now there was no pain in her gaze, only calm strength. She knocked. When the door swung open, Sipho appeared with his usual smirk. He leaned lazily against the frame, his eyes glinting with arrogance. "So," he said, "you've finally come crawling back. Couldn't survive out there, could you?" He chuckled, expecting to see tears in her eyes. But Amelie stood tall, her face unreadable. She looked straight at him and spoke clearly, her voice calm and steady. "I didn't come to enter. I came to reclaim." Sipho frowned, confused. "Reclaim what? This is my house. You have nothing here." His laugh was sharp, but there was a flicker of unease behind it. Before he could say more, Mr. Dlamini stepped forward. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and held it up for Sipho to see. "This house," he said firmly, "legally belongs to Mrs. Amelie. The deed is under her name, signed and sealed. You may strut around as if you own it, but the law says otherwise." Sipho's smile froze. His hand, which had been resting on the doorframe, slipped slightly. He blinked, staring at the papers as though they were a trick. "No, that's not possible," he muttered. His voice was quieter now, the arrogance draining from it. Amelie did not flinch. "You thought you could throw me away," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "But everything you claimed, everything you mocked me for losing, was never yours to begin with." Sipho's eyes darted between Amelie and Mr. Dlamini, panic creeping into his face. The smirk was gone. His pride, so swollen just days before, was cracking like thin glass. The man who had once laughed at her from the window now stood silent, his confidence slipping through his fingers. The night air was cool, but Amelie felt no chill. For the first time in years, she wasn't begging, she wasn't crying, she was standing in her truth. And as Sipho's confusion deepened into fear, she knew this was only the beginning of his fall. The house was hers, and now so was her power. The very next day, Amelie returned to the house again, this time with Mr. Dlamini walking firmly by her side. But they weren't alone. Mr. Dlamini had called for witnesses, a few neighbors who had seen Amelie thrown out, and even a police officer to make sure everything was handled properly. People gathered quickly, whispering and craning their necks, curious about what was about to happen. Sipho opened the door with the same swagger, though his face was not as confident as before. He looked at the small crowd and smirked, pretending not to care. "What is this circus?" he said loudly, trying to act as if he still had control. Mr. Dlamini stepped forward and raised his voice so everyone could hear. He pulled out the deed and announced, "This document is the official title deed to this house, and it is not under Sipho's name. It belongs to Mrs. Amelie." The words cut through the air like lightning. The neighbors gasped. Some covered their mouths, others murmured in shock. The very woman they had seen thrown out barefoot in the cold was, in fact, the rightful owner all along. Sipho's face twisted in anger. He shouted, "Lies! She's making this up. This is my house. I paid for everything here." He tried to snatch the papers from Mr. Dlamini's hand, but the lawyer calmly stepped back, handing the documents to the police officer. The officer examined them, nodded, and read aloud. "The property located at this address is legally registered under the name of Mrs. Amelie." The crowd broke into louder whispers. A neighbor muttered, "So all this time it was hers?" Another said, "And he treated her like nothing." Their voices carried, and Sipho heard every word. Nality, standing just behind Sifo, felt the heat of shame rise to her cheeks. She quietly stepped away, pretending to check her phone, and then slipped into the street without a word. She had no interest in standing beside a man whose lies were crumbling in front of everyone. Sifo tried one last time, his voice cracking as he yelled, "This is a setup. Emily tricked me. I built this life." But no one believed him. The evidence was clear. The law had spoken, and the man who had once laughed out of the window was now exposed for what he truly was. Emily stood at the center of it all, her posture straight, her face calm. Just days before, these same neighbors had watched her beg in the cold, humiliated and helpless. Now they saw her rise, not with shouts or anger, but with quiet dignity. She did not gloat. She did not laugh. She simply lifted her chin and met Sifo's frantic eyes with steady calm. In that moment, Emily reclaimed not just her home, but her pride. And the street that had once echoed with her cries now echoed with the sound of Sifo's downfall. The crowd outside the house grew quieter after the police officer confirmed the truth. Sifo stood frozen, his face pale, his pride slipping away like sand through his fingers. He looked from the neighbors to the deed, then back to Emily, hoping she would soften, hoping she would give him a chance to talk his way out. But Emily's eyes were steady. She stepped forward, her voice calm and clear, carrying across the street. "Sifo," she said, "you have until morning to pack your things and leave this house. After that, you will no longer be welcome here." For a moment, Sifo didn't move. He blinked, as if her words hadn't registered. Then suddenly his arrogance snapped. "No, you can't do this," he shouted, his voice shaking. "This is my home. I built this life, not you." His chest heaved as he pointed a finger at her, desperate to hold on to the illusion of control. Emily did not flinch. She simply folded her arms, her silence louder than his scream. Sifo's anger cracked into desperation. His voice broke as he cried out, "Emily, please, please don't do this to me. We can fix this. I'll change, I swear." He dropped to his knees on the doorstep, his hands pressed together in a begging gesture. Just days ago, he had laughed at her tears. Now he was the one pleading, his voice shaking so badly it barely carried. The neighbors, who had once whispered about Emily's humiliation, stood in silence. Their eyes were wide as they watched the man who had strutted like a king crumble in front of everyone. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered, "Look at him now," begging the very woman he threw out. Sifo crawled forward on his knees, reaching for the edge of Emily's dress. "Emily, don't throw me away. I made a mistake. I was angry. Don't do this to me." His voice cracked, his pride completely shattered. Emily stepped back, her face calm, her chin slightly raised. "The night you threw me out," she said softly, "you made your choice. And now I am making mine." Her words landed heavy in the air. Sifo's sobs echoed, but Emily didn't waver. She turned slightly to the officer and Mr. Dlamini, signaling the matter was closed. The neighbors said nothing more. They simply watched as Sifo, once arrogant and untouchable, now looked small and defeated. His kingdom had collapsed in a single night, and the woman he had mocked as useless stood taller than ever. When Emily finally walked away from the door, she did not look back. Sifo remained on his knees, his cries fading into the silence of the street. And for the first time, everyone saw the truth. The power had always been hers. When Sifo was finally gone, the house felt different. The air seemed lighter, the silence softer. Emily walked through each room slowly, her fingers brushing against the walls she once thought of as her prison. Now they were hers, truly hers, not as a wife clinging to her husband's shadow, but as a woman standing in her own strength. She decided the house would no longer just be a reminder of her pain. It would become something greater, something alive with hope. With the inheritance her father had left her, Emily began to renovate. The faded walls were painted bright and welcoming, the broken furniture replaced with tables and chairs where women could gather. Soon, what was once her home became a community center, a safe place for women who had suffered the same kind of abuse and humiliation she had endured. Every corner of the house told a new story. In the kitchen, women shared meals and laughter instead of tears. In the living room, they held workshops on financial independence, teaching each other how to run small businesses and manage their own money. Emily used part of her inheritance to provide seed funding, helping women open bakeries, sewing shops, and food stalls. She wanted them to know what she had finally learned, that no woman should ever have to beg for her worth. Mr. Dlamini remained by her side, guiding her through the legal steps of building the center and setting up the businesses. His sharp mind and steady presence gave her confidence. And though their bond began with papers and signatures, it slowly grew into something warmer. He admired her resilience, the way she turned heartbreak into strength. And Emily found herself respecting not just his wisdom, but his quiet belief in her. Their admiration for each other was never rushed, never loud. It was in the way he stayed late at the office to make sure her projects were protected. It was in the way she listened carefully to his advice, knowing he wanted the best for her. Over time, trust blossomed where once there had only been legal obligation. But Amelie's greatest transformation was within herself. For years, she had measured her worth by Sipho's acceptance, by how much she could give to hold their marriage together. Now, she realized she had never needed his validation. She was not useless. She was not dead weight. She was a woman with vision, power, and a heart strong enough to lift others. The house that once witnessed her humiliation now echoed with the voices of women rising. It was filled with laughter, plans, and new beginnings. And in every smile she saw, Amelie was reminded that true self-worth doesn't come from being loved by a man. It comes from standing firm in your own power and helping others find theirs too. Months passed, and the house that once carried the sound of Sipho's arrogance now bloomed with new light. The dull walls had been painted a warm, bright color that seemed to glow under the Durban sun. Inside, women gathered every day, some sewing, some learning new skills, others simply laughing together over shared meals. The rooms were filled with joy, growth, and hope, a far cry from the cold silence that used to weigh them down. One afternoon, as the center buzzed with activity, Sipho walked past. His clothes were torn, his shoes worn out, his face marked by the weight of regret. Friends who once cheered for him had disappeared, and even Naledi had long abandoned him. He walked slowly, shoulders bent, like a man who had been emptied of all pride. He stopped at the gate and looked up. On the balcony stood Amelie, dressed simply but radiantly, speaking with a group of women who listened to her with admiration. Her laughter carried across the air, steady and confident. She was no longer the woman who cried under streetlights. She was a leader, respected and unshaken. Sipho's lips parted as if he wanted to call her name, but no sound came out. His throat tightened. For the first time, he realized fully what he had lost. Amelie did not look down at him. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than any insult, sharper than any words she could throw. Quietly, as if speaking only to herself, Amelie said, "The night you locked me out, you locked yourself out of my life. And I never looked back.